The Dynasty landscape has been turned on its head with injuries coming from week 2. Notably, we have Saquon Barkley out for the season. We have Christian McCaffrey out for a chunk, potentially maybe half of the rest of the regular season or fantasy season left. So we've got potentially 101, 102 out for the coming weeks, if not the rest of the season. And we are here to adjust, talk about the landscape, talk about the differing opinions on trade market and what is the action plan if you started 0-2, 2-0, because team dynamic also plays a role in dynasty trading and what moves to make now heading into week 3. It's also just a huge reminder of bye weeks have not even started, about how deep you may need to go with your dynasty rosters and starting lineup. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara, and we can just start right there. Saquon Barkley is the most notable name. Christian McCaffrey is out for a chunk, but Barkley, we already pressed reset, and the next time we see him is in 2021. They have signed Devonta Freeman. We don't always, by Tuesday night, get the news, but they have added Devonta Freeman. Dion Lewis is a player that is out there in a decent amount of leagues, not all leagues, but Dion Lewis was the one that was seeing by far the most snaps behind Saquon Barkley. And then you have Wayne Gallman, who probably now with Freeman signing is pretty much a longer-term stash and needing multiple injuries. So I would start with what we have, and the haves are not Saquon Barkley. It's what's left with the Giants. So how do you handle this? People will be listening to this at various points of the waiver process in week 3 between Devonta Freeman, probably shallow league only, Dion Lewis, maybe moderate league. What's your interest level based on, the typical back end of your roster?
Yeah, I think the key is, from my understanding of it, and this is something we'll have to see, but it's going to take Devonta Freeman some time because of COVID restrictions to actually integrate into the team, right? So he might not be active this week. If he is active, he's probably not going to get a full game plan implementation. So I guess the action play this week would be see late week what the status is, right? If he's going to play, if he's active, if he gets cleared, all of that stuff. And, at that point, figure out what type of role we expect for him. And so I think Dion Lewis is going to be lineup viable this week. So I think that's really the takeaway, at least for this week. And then can
you tell the Giants offensive line?
Yeah, well, that's a whole different story.
Are they complying with your projection there that he? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, how much is the upside? The situation, Saquon Barkley through 1+ games was struggling with as a big-time talent with finding his own upside. So now we're inserting Dion Lewis, Devonta Freeman, running back X that's not Barkley. To me, that's one of the biggest things is the upside enough to say, let's say you have to cut another injury away guy that you like, let's say Devontae Booker, or a few of these others where you might say the situation is much better if they were to be the starter, but they aren't right now. That to me is the interesting push-pull of some of these final roster spot running back types.
Yeah, I think this week in particular is pretty interesting for Dion Lewis. While the offensive line might not be that good, they're getting San Francisco, who just got absolutely decimated, is going West Coast, East Coast, basically lose everyone. Apparently got in a plane accident too, which should have been a precursor to this is going to be a bad week. Backed into someone or something on the runway or had to deplane. I don't know if you saw this or not. It was crazy. But now have to fly back west, are coming back east again after losing.
Well, I heard they're staying East Coast. They're staying.
Oh, are they?
Mid-Atlantic area. They're not going all the way, but I think it's somewhere. Don't misquote me. It might be, Virginia, Pennsylvania, whatever. It's not in New York, but yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize that they were, maybe the plane.
But still, they're reeling from their own injuries for sure.
Yeah. That whole scenario is happening, and they're reeling. And so I'll say this in terms of Dion Lewis, I think if you're going to get a week, I think this is the week that you're probably going to get from him. And then we'll see. And we haven't seen Devonta Freeman. We don't know what kind of shape he is. I think there's upside. And listen, in terms of comparing him to other situations, right? We know the question for Dion Lewis hasn't been whether or not he's good, right? We know that he's serviceable. The question has always been longevity in terms of injury. Well, right now, like we know that week 3 is most likely, as we sit here right now on Tuesday night, is probably going to be a Dion Lewis week. And, is that week 8, week 12, is that still the case? That's a whole different story. But I think in terms of right now, he's viable. I haven't seen a lot of trades involving him yet. I would put probably a second round market value on it. I doubt that's going to happen because Devonta Freeman is there and we sort of have that question mark. So at this point, I think the play is probably just to hold and see if you get a week out of them. And one of the things that we talk about, and when you lose a guy like Barkley, when you lose a guy like McCaffrey, and Mike Davis is a different example of this, which is probably a better one right now, honestly. But you're not trying to replicate the entire player, right? You're never going to replicate Christian McCaffrey. You're never going to replicate
Moneyball with Jason Giambi.
Absolutely. You're doing a week by week. We're going to piece this thing together and we're going to just play, we're just going to try and add up the warp, right? And we're going to try and limit our losses, right? And so wins over replacement is the warp concept, right? We know this is the week, right? Now we lose Barkley, we lose McCaffrey, but where we have these guys rostered, I mean, I think I've got Dion Lewis rostered in 40% of my dynasty leagues, Mike Davis about the same. So in situations where I've lost these guys or lost other guys, right, now's the plug and play, right? Now's where the benefit of being running back heavy, it comes into play because you get identifiable starter weeks out of them and plug them in. And what will happen hopefully is you start to add up that warp, and you're not going to get 100% of Barkley or 100% of McCaffrey, but if you get 75%, you're limiting your losses. You're probably at that point less than a win difference. And so that's really one of the things that I would think about in terms of this whole conversation. And there's decimated injuries all over the place. I mean, we could talk about all types of situations, but I think the key is understanding that when you lose one of these guys, it does not mean your season's over, right? It does not mean that. What it means is you have to figure out a different way to put it back together. And you use the Moneyball example. When they lost Jason Giambi, they were never going to replace Jason Giambi. They're going to replace him with 3 guys, basically do a 3 guys who together are going to try and add up to what they ended up losing. It's more complicated than that, but that's really the moral of the story. In that spot, we talk about, and I think it was last week or the week before, if you have to start 2 running backs, that's 26 weeks, right? Well, now you got 2 weeks out of Barkley and you lose Barkley. Now you got 11 weeks, right? You got to figure out 11 weeks. And, whether it's Dion Lewis this week or Mike Davis or whatever, I mean, this is the time that you have to do that. If it's Jeff Wilson, right? It could be Jeff Wilson this week. You have to, these situations happen, and that's the game you're playing now. And that's the benefit of having backup running backs, is because when they're viable, it's usually pretty identifiable in the week leading up to it.
Yeah, and you were talking about piecing it together. Let's also look at the positives, because I think a lot of people forget where it's the woe is me. I lost Cortland Sutton for the year and Kenny Galladay, and I just lost McCaffrey. Like you can play the all negative, tail of this. But I think on the positive end, I always like to look at the, starts gained. What depth charts from mid-August or late August look different from, for now. I mean, for example, James Robinson. I mean, he was on the waiver wire then, right? This is created. We have Antonio Gibson. I mean, the 2 weeks, he's been let's call him flex or running back 2 type projection. We're still kind of waiting for this breakout game, but he's one that he was going to be behind Darius Geis and Adrian Peterson. So let's not pretend that is coming out of the ether. Jonathan Taylor was going to be potentially a mid to later season arrival, pending what happens with Marlon Mack. Week 2, he was a top 10 football guys projection, and you wouldn't see that changing much going forward. So that is found money. Those are found starts that maybe you're plugging in Taylor as a flex, but now find a reason to get him out of your lineup. Good luck. So these are positives that we have already achieved. We got, Miles Sanders was out week 1. That was you could stream Boston Scott out of the gate, that in that first week. So these are all ones that now we have clarity. I mean, Le'Veon Bell being out. I mean, Frank Gore isn't exciting, but technically that was a new opportunity. So now we have these other opportunities. And like you said, it's a puzzle piece of you're trying to replicate. I just remember Scott Hatterberg from that movie. I don't know. I couldn't get it out of my head. But just like, he was the guy that could walk.
Pick a machine.
Yeah, exactly. A walk. We're paying you to get on base. I don't care if it's a hit or a walk. But so these are all the, found starts that we're just getting started. We're 2 weeks in. And so, like you said, I mean, maybe now you're plugging in Mike Davis, who has a pretty nice projection, higher than Dion Lewis for this week. And like you said, let's not pretend like we know. Devonta Freeman, he did not look great last time we saw him. So yes, teams have offered him contracts. Yes, it sounds like it was more he wanted more money or, whatever, or maybe a promised workload or whatever from other teams that he has not found a deal until now. But I don't think this one's super great for him to get 60% of snaps or something, immediately or soon or whatever either. So is he better than Wayne Gallman at this point in his career? I don't think that's a 100% to 0% answer. So I think let's look at Leonard Fournette as a good example of, again, a much superior player, but it's not like he came in midweek or so and he barely played in the first game. And then in week 2, this second week, he played more, but we're still kind of wondering when he's going to be the starter, if he's going to be the starter. And I think Devonta Freeman could be a low-level example of that. Of week 3, it's all Dion Lewis. And if Freeman plays, it's like, he just sees a couple carries, gets on the field, whatever. Week 4, maybe he's a 20% snap guy, 25% snap guy, but relatively meaningless to Dion Lewis's projection. Then we're talking week 5 already. I don't even know when they have their bye, but you see where I'm going with this, where Dion Lewis could actually be 3-4 week viable, possible, and maybe longer than that. What if Freeman has an injury as he's getting up to speed with NFL practices and actually being a part of the process for the first time and not doing things on his own? So all these things are in play to make Dion Lewis more viable and for longer. But I would say, of these two, you kind of mentioned it in passing, Jordan, but Mike Davis, I mean, he looked, number one, good this past week. He's stuck around the NFL a lot longer. He was basically out of the league. He comes back in, and now he's been firmly on depth charts for a while, but prototypically sized two-way player. And now we're going to get, 2, 3, 6 weeks, something like that, some spectrum like that, where I'm pretty excited about the, running any particular week, a running back 2 projection with running back 1 upside, depending on how much he gets usage in the passing game out there in Carolina, where their defense is going to stink. So unless, they're bringing Reggie Bonifant up and, he has a receiving centric profile, but I think Mike Davis has the more upside of the two guys, albeit in a shorter prism, because McCaffrey will be back by projection.
Yeah, I'm just looking right now, and it's early, so this isn't. I wouldn't consider this particularly, efficient yet. But we have 20. He's at 25 in terms of start rate right now, 56% in lineups, and we're talking Tuesday night. That's before waivers have run in a lot of leagues, and before we have. I haven't set lineups yet for next week, so I know that number is going to go up. So, that's a pretty comfortable play, right? That's exactly what you're looking for. I think that running back 2 with running back 1 upside, heck, 15, 20 touches, I don't think is an unreasonable number out of him. And I think we're going to see more of these opportunities, unfortunately. I mean, it has been it's just been a reality that we've seen guys getting banged up, and Mostert. I mean, we could go on and on. Mostert, McCaffrey, Barkley. I mean, we saw James Conner go out and come back. Right? There's a lot of these situations, and I think this is a good example of, on the back end of your roster, you need to have a very redraft mindset. Right? You don't want to have a super long term. Right, we
Justin Watson mindset.
Jeff Janis is the player.
The previous example.
Yeah, it's the Jeff Janis rule, right? You can't have these guys on the back end of your roster. They're 5% bets, right? Like the odds that Mike Davis gets some starter weeks is much higher than that. And here we are.
Any running back 2 in the NFL,
correct?
Right?
Yes,
I mean,
they're
going to be like 50-50
name,
bets, right? Or better. of seeing some spot, at least one start at some point, as long as they are the number 2 and they themselves are healthy. And I keep meaning to reference this. It's always in my thoughts because I read it a couple years ago. But we talk about injury rates and things like that, but also the per injury rate from this article that they collected a lot of data on all the positions. First of all, running back injury rate is a lot closer to wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback is better than those. And again, they're protecting that position even more, even though we had a couple of injuries this week. But running back, it's about a 5% chance. And this is not just starters, but obviously you would figure that players seeing more touches, more contact in the NFL, you would have a higher chance than a guy that plays 10 snaps, or plays specials plus, a smattering of offensive opportunities. But a 5% chance, let's just look around the NFL. If you've got, 2 running backs, let's say primarily seeing duty for the given team, that's 64. And then 5% of that, would be about 3 running backs a week. Now, not all of those are starters, but the point is, if you have market share of the primary backups that can benefit, I mean, you mentioned already, you got about 40% of Lewis and Davis. I mean, that is higher than you can realistically have of Barkley and McCaffrey. Why? The barrier is price. The price was free for the other guys. That the price of McCaffrey and Barkley is a high rookie pick, a startup draft where you have a high pick, trading for them. It's really difficult of a high frontline player to have 40-50% ownership unless you got them in their rookie draft and you still have them, as a target player. So again, that's why. So the benefit of knowing these odds it would just happen to be name guys in Mostert and the top 2 names, and also who's the other 49ers guy that went down? Tevin Coleman. Right. But so it just, I think part of it is it just feels like it's bigger name guys, which it is, but this happens all the time. It just may be like no one's really talking about Darrell Williams, getting dinged up in week 2. Is Darwin Thompson now the backup in Kansas City? I mean, if they activate DeAndre Washington, that could be a key, to the longevity of this injury for Williams. But like all these, if it happens to a number 2, number 3 running back, people don't give it a passing glance. But that's the thing that we get geeky about. It's like, now all of a sudden, somebody's out and there's a primary backup spot open. How are they addressing that? Are they on the waiver wire? Can we get a lot of market share quickly? And that's the thing I find so funny is that I can go from 0% on Corey Clement to all of a sudden 50% in my leagues. Why? Because I'm churning those last few roster spots. He's the most interesting guy. And now back down to 0%. Why? Miles Sanders is back. Boston Scott's probably going to play over him. But he had that window of, what if Miles Sanders doesn't return? What if it ends up being more serious? What if Boston Scott gets hurt filling in? There's a number of avenues where you say, this is the 5% bet I want this week, as opposed to, like you said, it's 5% overall for a wide receiver, sort of big picture in their entire career, that you soak up how much time with your roster spot. I want to mention, before we get into the Saquon Barkley and McCaffrey side, which I also think is pretty fascinating, and people 10 minutes ago probably thought we were going to talk about that. To me, there's a little less action plan in that for everybody at large. Do want to remind you to never miss a moment of the Football Guys show by subscribing to Football Guys TV on YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and review to all of your podcasting platforms. And we mentioned about the news, and every week, whether it's practice reports, who's trending towards playing and not playing, you want to be a part of the Football Guys daily email update, which is cultivated and delivered from Joe Bryant, your daily guide to all your news and instant analysis. And you can sign up at footballguys.com/free. And I want to give a shout out to all of the My Football Guys products. I'm in 40 leagues, and I know not everyone is in even close to that many, but even if you're in 5, the My Football Guys and the Dominator platforms that are available with your membership pay for it themselves, beyond the articles, beyond all the in-depth weekly content in season, just handling the waivers, what your lineup looks like, who's available, setting lineups, getting many opinions on projections. You can put that together in your own recipe for who you want to weight the most within the projections. It's all invaluable to give you one quick look. All you have to do is refresh it before your waivers, after your waivers, on Sunday when you set lineups. And again, a huge time saver. If you're in any number of leagues. It's just, to me, it saves me probably an hour, if not more, every single week just managing my teams, let alone the advice, content, and resources it provides on the site. So that is my personal pitch. Again, it's like, what's the thing about, Rogaine? It's like, I'm not just the owner, I'm also a customer or something. So again, independent of me being on staff and having a podcast and writing articles for them over the years, this is, again, I was a subscriber, and I saw the value, is what I will say, of the season-long pro membership long before I was writing articles or anything else. So Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, Jordan. There's a number of interesting trades. We'll get to that in a minute, but discuss whatever angle you see fitting in terms of, if you lost. I actually saw one team that lost Barkley and McCaffrey. I don't know if that's actually fair.
They probably won a championship last year, so I don't really feel bad for them.
That is true. That is true. So talk about, does it matter if you started 0-2 versus 2-0 if you have one of them? Obviously McCaffrey's coming back, but what's your approach to trading in terms of trading them away, potentially trading for them from those teams and offering production or offering assets that are more, that are less injured at the time, obviously. So talk about so many angles, because welcome to in-season trading, and it's way more interesting to me than June.
Yeah, it is. And this is, I think you need to have a plan, right? You need to figure out what you want to do. And this is a classic case of your play needs to reflect your strategy, right? Listen, I don't think that I'm in play for this season. Let me go out and make a bid for McCaffrey and offer the owner or the other Dynasty player Barkley in a trade for current production, right? That's one angle to play it. The other is, and what I think is a really interesting debate here, is how you value Barkley long-term versus how you value losing him this year, and what that would mean in terms of the benefit of having a different player for whatever 10 games left in your regular season, right? That's a really interesting debate. Because what you're seeing now, and I'll be interested in your take on this specifically, is what you're seeing right now is Barkley going in trades for guys that went significantly later in startup drafts. I've seen Josh Jacobs straight up. I've seen Joe Mixon straight up. I've seen Nick Chubb straight up, right? Those types of deals. 6 months from now, I don't think that, Jacobs might be a different story, but 6 months from now, I think that Barkley is going to be back ahead of those guys in terms of rankings, in terms of ADP, in terms of where he's going in drafts. The interesting part is what you're trading in terms of wins right now, right? If you trade Barkley,
potential wins, because the assumption is health of the player you're getting to fill in for him, correct?
Correct. And so you have you have 10 games, right? You're through 2 weeks. There's going to be a bye week. So you have 10 games left in your regular season. You can get a win and a half, right? And that's a very good production, right? That's probably top 5 running back production from here on out. If you're looking at top 12 production, that might be closer to a win, maybe a little bit more than that from here through the end of the regular season.
Can you just say that one more time? So again, if you make a trade for Barkley for what you view in 2021 plus an inferior player that you will have lower once we get to January 1, you are essentially buying, as you said, maybe a win over the next 3 months. Continue.
Correct. That's exactly. You put it much better than much more succinctly than I did. So the question is really, what's that worth, right? How much does that matter to you? If you are a 5-win team, that should matter very little. If you're an 8-win team, that should matter a lot, right? Because the bump from 8 to 9 puts you very much in a buy window, right? 9 to 10 is even bigger, but that's really where you have to make that evaluation. I think paint the worst case scenario, or I guess the best case scenario for the position. and tell me like how low Barkley could conceivably be ranked in terms of, let's call it February 1.
If we go perfect storm of everybody else. Oh, well, I think
and everything.
If you want to go worst case, let's go. Let me pull this up. Make sure I don't forget one player. So, McCaffrey presumed to be back. Let's assume he comes back. He's his normal self, finishes the season strong. That's one. Ezekiel Elliott. So that's an easy story to tell.
Yep.
Josh Jacobs. I think it's a pretty easy story to tell, especially when you're going to get to the offseason and he's basically 2 years younger. And Jacobs is on a really good track this year to have a much better season than a year ago. So if he posts that, again, I think that's there's a good argument there. Let's talk about having a job, having their own personal profiles. But let's say they finish on a higher, let's say a positive trajectory from where we stand today, which is basically having running back one projections to some level every week and having a strong workload for their teams and now they are going to be 3 years younger respectively from Saquon Barkley and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor. I could see best case scenarios that they are both ahead of Saquon Barkley in January startup drafts. I think Alvin Kamara could have an argument. That is probably where it stops. If I had to take a guess on the most people, the most backs, unless we see something like Cam Akers go completely nuts or J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram gets injured and then J.K. Dobbins literally goes for, 100 and something yards every, average per game and, just takes a hold, which they're running a 3-man committee right now. But again, but that's about the list. What was that about? I think that's about 6, 7.
So I got McCaffrey, Zeke, Josh Jacobs, Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Alvin Kamara, and Dobbins, I guess, and Akers.
But essentially, Kamara was the last one. But I mean,
right.
So probably that's Miles Sanders, but I just don't. Anyway, that's where it gets really murky. But I think that top list would be about 6.
What do you think? Yes, so we sort of that's the range of outcomes. What do you think is a reasonable landing spot? Like if in reality, right?
In reality, behind McCaffrey, behind Zeke, and then I'll pick probably one other guy between, and Jacobs would have the highest probability. Taylor and Edwards-Helaire would have other, and I guess Kamara in that would. So those 3 would have lesser probabilities in the ping pong balls. And then and Jacobs would be 1, but I'll guess 1. I'll put the over/under line at 1.5 of those ahead of Saquon Barkley in January.
So we're looking like running back 4 or running back 5, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the format, that could be mid-first ish. So I mean, I think part of it is the bad taste of a game and a quarter ish. That again, he was fighting for his own production, right? I mean, the situation was stinky. That's going to leave a bad taste in people's mouths. He's a year older. Yes, he's a stud. And yes, you shouldn't discount him much at all for being 24. But when you got guys that are, Jacobs at 22, some other guys that are building profiles at 21, those guys get highly valued and quickly. So, in the off season, which is, a beauty contest for your rosters. So again, I think that the 101, 102 where he was this offseason, we're probably talking more like, maybe you'll see people jump in at 2, 3, 4 on occasion, but I think more likely it'll be, 6 to the end of the round, 5 to the end of the round, something like that. If it's super flex or, obviously you put probably a couple quarterbacks ahead of him if I had to guess.
Yeah.
But when you said like the more you were creating that case of, so you're trying to buy. So the problem I have is, okay, I'm going to trade him for Joe Mixon and a second, or Joe Mixon. And again, if you're doing it and something and the and isn't a first or isn't it's probably going to not be a big deal. It's really Mixon. Like to me, that's something that would make me very uncomfortable because what I always say is you have to do the trade that if you do the trade and the player you're trying to buy points, you're trying to buy wins this year. And if that player gets hurt tomorrow, because I've had this happen in trades before. You trade trying to help your team right now, but if you don't make a dynasty deal, if the player you trade for gets hurt, then and you never get to start them, do you still like the deal?
Right.
And if the answer is no, don't do it.
So I was thinking about this, the warp calculation that we were talking about, right? So if it's a win and a half, I think the reasonable number to take isn't that, right? It's to knock that down by 40%, right? So take 60% of that number, whatever you think it is, right? And the 40% that you're losing is the injury risk, right? I mean, that's, I think, how I would think about it. So if you think it's a 1.5 win situation, that's closer to 1, right? That's what you're actually buying. And if you get 1.5, that's gravy, but I don't think you can plan on that. So I do think when you sort of take it the next step in terms of injury risk, and we know serious injury risk is about 40% on running backs. So you're thinking 9 out of the top 24 coming into the season, that's sort of where I come to that number. And, I guess, is this a case of, should we discount that? No, because guys have gotten hurt already, but that's probably a little bit lower because we're further into the season and guys haven't gotten, guys have gotten through games and haven't gotten hurt yet. So specific players. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting interchange. What I think is fascinating and this is the first time I've actually had to publicize rankings, but from a process perspective, it's really interesting because you've got to value Barkley as a 0 for right now versus, right. There's scenarios, I think, that you could put a player over him right now in terms of September 22nd, when we're recording rankings, that don't belong over him in February, right? Because you have the opportunity to gain that much more value. And, and
production. It's not, we don't mean to downplay it, but I mean, you got
right.
3 months of lineups this summer.
Absolutely. And you're losing let's not get crazy here, but you're losing 10, 15% of Barkley in his prime. I mean, that is worth something.
More than that. Value. I mean, a running back, 27, 28 is when they're going to start to seep. Now he's an all-timer, so you probably want to go a little more than that. But also, again, is the situation going to be that much better? I mean, we were talking about his talent needing to overcome the situation. And that's why I think something like, and again, I'm not, we don't need to just make this argument anymore, but let's say, Edwards-Helaire, and for me, it's Jonathan Taylor, but you say, look at their situations. I mean, how much easier is it to gain yards in their respective situations with their offensive lines, their respective varying, it's more quarterback scheme. Look at all the other weapons with Edwards-Helaire. With Jonathan Taylor, look at that offensive line. Look at how just in week 2 alone, they catered towards him. He became the centerpiece in the first quarter. I mean, it was like they had one drive. It just went straight down the field. He got all the touches. And yet you would almost say he underperformed because he could have had 2-3 touchdowns this past week, or he could have had more receptions, but they were winning. So there's a lot of factors, but it's like, but look at, how much easier their situations are that Barkley, even returning next year, will not have. So this is so you were saying, I mean, look at the next span of time. So you're counting this point forward, and that's what makes dynasty valuation and ranking so interesting, because it's like, well, what's your focus and how are you, even if you don't put numbers to it, you're saying how important is this year versus 20, like you said, if you're going to put, let's just say, if you put Edwards-Helaire over Saquon Barkley right now, but if you're going to flip that back in January, then what's the rank, then like how much redraft centric are you doing to the numbers and sort of your thoughts that go into that? Because, again, if he gets hurt next week, are you going to have Barkley over him? Because then you're just, in, out, based on who's healthy. And that's kind of a little bit different. Like how I do, rankings and valuations. It's like, well, I basically accelerate the year. So Saquon Barkley now is a year older because the next time he will play will be X years old. So that's going to be the factor that you have to use. And like you were talking about, the prime window of production of like, well, what percentage is he losing of that? Because it's meaningful. An entire season of running back production on it's different than a 23-year-old, DeAndre Hopkins losing 1 year. It's a lot less important.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting. Let me ask you a question. Just I'm going to say a statement. You just react. Jonathan Taylor, running back 2 in Dynasty
Right now or ever?
right now.
Again, I think didn't we have a talk like on the show the last few episodes, maybe last week, I don't know, but like just that that you had some pause because I'm not putting words in your mouth, but because he wasn't a first round pick, right? It changes the historical optics.
Yeah,
right?
It changes the range of historically. It changes the range of outcomes. Yes,
correct. Okay, but yeah, see, and this is why I think Jonathan. I was going to ask you, sort of. Maybe I asked last week, but what it would take for Taylor to be running back 1 or running back 2 when we get to January? Like, what does that take? Based on what I saw in week 2 and maybe how he's going to be used, I think he just needs to stay healthy and he's going to post a massive season. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but what do you think the lowest? Let's say this. Let's say he averages, because we have to use something. Let's say he averages 100 total yards per game for the rest of the season. And he posts, let's say, 10 to 12 touchdowns over, 14 games, whatever. At 21 years old, the fact that he was such a high rookie pick, what's the lowest that he could be valued in a startup draft, knowing only that information and not, the other players around him that are vying for the same spots? But just that alone, the fact that he basically has the lead job the entire year, on a 1,600 total yard pace, plenty of touchdowns, looks the part, high enough pedigree, even though he wasn't, top 5 or first round or anything. You can't get out of the first round, right? That's not even, we're already setting the baseline, right?
Yeah. It's a first round pick.
He'd be higher than Jacobs was a year ago, right? Or no? Because he would outperform Jacobs. Under what I said, he would outperform Jacobs this last year. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think he'd be higher than that. I was just trying to think where Jacobs, like mid-second, was usually where I was seeing him.
And he crept up to the late first-ish.
Yeah, and I think he should have been higher. But when you look at guys that hit in the top, got rookies that hit, right? That's about where they fall. Right. So you're describing something bigger than a hit. It's you're describing a massive 12. Hit.
Top 12, top 10, yeah.
Yeah. The first and second round running backs that hit for a top 24 season land historically on average right about the 1-2 turn. That's where you would expect them in terms of year 2 valuation. I think there's plenty of room for Taylor to go up from that. One question that fascinates me, and I've thought a lot about this one, is if you just assume, for the sake of argument, that let's assume that Josh Jacobs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Jonathan Taylor all finish with the same stat line this year. Whatever it is, they finish with the same number of points, same running back finish. How do you rank them?
So same catches.
No, not necessarily same catches.
No, but I just tongue in cheek.
Yeah. Wait, no, because that would give you're giving Edwards-Helaire way too much credit. Yeah. If they all had the same ranking season long points, right?
Yeah.
How would you expect the market to react, and sort of how would you think about that situation?
I will go in how you see most drafts ordered. I bet it would be Edwards-Helaire, Jacobs, Taylor. If I had to bet, that's not the order I would have them. I would have it Taylor, Jacobs, Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah.
If they all finish identical. But man, yeah, see, this is when you really isolate, right? Like the other factors, which is when you say they produce the same, so you can't use that. I just keep thinking to how, it's going to be wild to see them valued. And we got Barkley as a wild card now to the backdrop of early startup drafts. But also, this is what we talked about with, Nick Chubb. Like, can he really get up there? I think we talked about this in the off season, is can he get all the way home based on how old he already is? And that's going to be a limiting, Alvin Kamara, same thing, right? Like they're going to have age working against them with guys passing. We're not even talking about what happens what could be happening later in the season with Akers or Dobbins or Swift, that there are other players possibly to get into this conversation. And I just, that's the part to me. I mean, we are in such a robust running back marketplace right now that the pedigree that you are getting in the first couple rounds, there's just a lot of names that you can't possibly, collect them all, and no one can snipe you because there's so many.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's get into some live market. And again, most of the trades we talk about on this podcast are from the Football Guys Shark Pool forum. You can go. It's in-season Dynasty trades that have been completed. Don't talk about ones you're proposing and things like that. There's a little snark that goes on in there because it's about completed trades only. But there's already been, over the last 24, 48 hours, some, I don't know if I'm McCaffrey one. I'll kind of scroll through this. Let's rapid fire this and give a few thoughts. 14-team non-PPR. We got Saquon Barkley for Joe Mixon and James Conner. Mentions he's a contender. Lost Barkley, McCaffrey, and Sutton this weekend. So talk about pour one out for this owner, but still has a really good team because he had Mahomes and Henry, Hopkins, blah, blah, blah. The point is, he is still a strong contender. So there's a couple I mean, does he really need to do this move if he's still a strong contender? But what do you think about Mixon and Connor, 14-team non-PPR?
I mean, that could be 5 losses with those injuries, right? Would you say it was Barkley, McCaffrey, and Sutton?
Yeah, 5.
I mean, that could be 5 losses. That's
5 warp. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
You're not getting 5 back with Mixon and Connor.
No, you're not. You're not. But
3?
You're getting
best case 3.
Maybe. Mixon's one I've thought a lot about. I think it's pretty close. I wouldn't say I have a strong lean either way. I think there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of risk on the Mixon Connor side.
That you're not getting enough ceiling, right?
Yeah, that you're not getting enough ceiling, and there's job risk with Connor. I think if he's healthy, I think it's his job.
But week two, we really didn't know what was going to happen, right? I mean, some people were full on Benny Snell. Unfortunately, I mean, Connor went to workhorse mode. I think he's a better player. But yeah, I mean, the next injury, it just very tenuous. Yeah,
it's very tenuous. And what's the ceiling upside with Mixon, right? So is he that 1.5 warp guy?
To me, that's a train wreck deal. I personally, I know as a contender, it's easy to get fixated on the in season, but to me, that's a deal you got to say, if I need production, why don't you just go after Connor for a heck of a lot less? Why don't you why don't you go after Gurley for a heck of a lot less? Or, just figure out, if you're a good team, try to package some of your depth, keep your core together. Put Barkley on the shelf and say, I'm going to get him next year with Barkley. You can still compete and contend. I mean, heck, why don't you just put in a big bid on, Mike Davis, or, if you're really worried about, or, be quasi aggressive with Dion Lewis and see how that, I just think there's a bunch of other ways to do it, and start small before you just say, let me trade the guy that just got hurt. That's my personal.
If you did it efficiently, and as you sort of said that, I'm thinking more about the Mixon angle of this. If you did it efficiently and sort of did it well and were very aggressive in terms of one injury away running backs and piecing it together, you think you could replicate Mixon over the course of like a 10-game season?
Could you find your Scott Hatterberg? Yeah, I do. Because, again, if you take shots on 7-8 guys, I mean, let's look at the probability. I think we did a dramatic reading of let's do the numbers on a show we did together once. But again, if you're looking at that 5% per week kind of odds, if you've got 7 or 8 guys, I mean, every 2-3 weeks, you're going to get somebody popping up for some segment of 1 to the rest of the season spectrum of spot starts. So that's, I think, very important to realize that, if you were sitting on Jerick McKinnon a few weeks ago, it's like, well, now you've got, I think Football Guys has him, early in the week for 16, 17 PPR points. I mean, I know he only has like 8 touches on the season. We haven't seen him in a couple of years, but you're probably rolling him out.
Yeah.
So
they haven't signed Matt Asiata, right? That hasn't happened.
Oh man, he's looking over his shoulder. He's like, wait, he's not a fit in this scheme, is he? Kyle Juszczyk. What if Kyle Juszczyk is the new Matt Asiata? He's like, oh my god, look how athletic this guy is. He's like Matt Asiata, but worse. All right, we got FFPC, so maybe that changes the vantage point slightly. But we got a Barkley trade here. He added some other things, but it was relatively insignificant. So we'll go Barkley for DeAndre Hopkins, James Robinson, McKinnon, and a second. Wow. It's short rosters, so that does come into play, but they did even it out. But Robinson, flex play with upside from there. McKinnon now a starter this week. We'll see about beyond that. And then Hopkins still around one guy.
Man, the Hopkins transition point has been something I've looked at. That's interesting. The problem I would have with this is the end of your roster, right? I mean, you're in a 20-man. You're in a 20-man roster setting. I'd be interested to know the backside of this roster. But you basically said Barkley for Hopkins, James Robinson, and McKinnon.
Well, they gave up Ito Smith and Giovanni Bernard, and I would say Giovanni Bernard is not insignificant. Ito Smith is. So it was a 3 for 3. But like you said, you're kind of locking in because McKinnon and Robinson aren't going anywhere. So.
Yeah, I mean, Gio, and so at that point, I think Gio and McKinnon are basically equal. You can cross that out. So I'd take the Barkley side.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Hopkins is going to replicate about 75% probably of the warp. Just
but that doesn't help you, right? Like that doesn't.
Oh, I know.
It doesn't.
And he's going to be 29 next year. No, I got it. Yeah. I mean, again, you get to January. How do you feel?
Right. Not great. I don't think.
Right. So the add-ons to me are not enough.
Yeah.
Let's go through. Okay. So we got, let's see. This was a deal for, they traded for Juju Smith-Schuster. Let's just throw this one in. A first, a second, and Brandon Ayuk. Juju is another one that is being discounted because of the ancillary targets in that offense.
So it's Juju for a first, a second, and Brandon Ayuk?
Yes. Stock league. Juju. Okay. I'm pretty excited to see Ayuk, but I mean, Juju's profile is again, he's another one. This week I'd explore seeing if you can get something done, because I've seen folks not treat him as such.
He's wide receiver 12 on the season. Right?
And yeah, it's viewed as a train wreck, right?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So those are the only ones in the thread. Do you have any other advice here towards the end of the show for if you're thinking of offering trades for? Again, I think McCaffrey's a different discussion because it's a shorter duration. And Barkley's really the one that you can stash on IR, but a team looking at, I need to get something this year, that's where you can get a nice buyer seller market.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, as a broad rule, people play Dynasty, get into Dynasty, but then think really short term. So I think generally speaking, if you have the longest view in the room, to quote Sam Hinkie, it's very contrarian, right? So you can get deals done if you think, hey, listen, I'm not talking 5 years from now. I'm talking
2021,
5 weeks from now, right? I mean, that is long term, right? At this point, right? You think about things in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years type time span. That thinking to next year in terms of that, I mean, making a true analysis of your team. How good am I? Right. And if the answer is, I'm not sure, and you're 1-1 and low in all play, making a play for Barkley right now, it might be the cheapest you get him. Right. So I would say be very honest with yourself and make a very honest assessment about it, because this is an opportunity to get value that you might not otherwise get, right? This is the opportunity to get a first round startup pick for a third round startup pick value, right? Like this is that opportunity. The question is how does that fit into your roster construction? How does that fit into your plan? And again, we sort of talked about that Mixon line, right? Like, okay, can I replicate it, right? Can whatever I'm trading for Barkley, right? Can I fix that, right? Can I trade for Barkley, but also not lose more than like a win in the process, right? In terms of making one of those deals, I think that's a really interesting debate to have, and something you should really think about in terms of this, because there's a lot of upside to a guy like Barkley. And you're getting him for a discount right now. I think having that really honest assessment with yourself, with your roster, and thinking about it, I think is really, really valuable.
Well, and what you say is everyone generally overrates their chances of winning a title this year anyway. You know that a 12-team league, 8.5%, and I mean, just offhand, you might have the number, but offhand, what do you think if you're a really strong top 1-2 team in your league on paper, or just overall strength? I mean, what is that number? 11%?
If you get a buy, it's about 25%.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're 3x. So there you go. All right. And that's and the bye week has a big part of that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just eliminating the one, even 55, 45, 60, 40, matchup that you could lose really helps a lot. And then you're only playing, likely good teams. So that hurts you as well. So but the point is that how much are you truly, your chances hurt or helped by one player? And that's where wins over replacement. And again, I mean, the whole theory of sometimes you see these teams, whether it's baseball or football or basketball, where it's like they trade away a player. Or what was the team this year that didn't have Kawhi Leonard, and they Toronto, right?
Toronto.
Yeah, Toronto made it pretty far, played well, and they made it just as far as the Clippers, right? So I mean, so they played again. They played well without him was the point, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like so I think a lot of times, like you said, replicating the 26 starts or X number of starts I need. That now, if you're a team that you really relied on, Barkley and one other guy, and now you have just the one other guy, but you don't have some of those ideal primary backups where you can on your own roster hit, that makes it really tough. And now the waiver wire is going to be tough because you've already had a couple of cycles. You had the preseason. You got vultures like Jordan and I that have just been, we just twist our mustache every week about how to get one over on our league mates for nothing, for like a free pickup or $1 pickup. And so it's just, so by now, I'm not going to say, you can't find Damian Williams with the third or fourth guy getting starts later in the season, but the primary backups are gone. So you really don't have those. So I think part of it, Jordan, is if you don't have those on your roster right now, chances every single week that you could get the next Mike Davis if you didn't get this one, or Dion Lewis or whatever. If you don't have guys like that on your roster right now, then I could see how you'd feel kind of trapped into trading, because you say, I don't have a personal fix. I mean, who am I going to pick up off the waiver wire? I mean, insert name here that is not, Jeff Wilson might be the best you can get in some leagues. And you say, well, how close is that? Well, in our opinion, it could be closer than you realize.
Yeah.
But perfect storm is kind of the thing you picture. But what I would say is, if you've stockpiled, you probably don't feel like you need to make a move. You're like, well, I'll start Mike Davis this week. It'll be okay. Or I got Antonio Gibson. We'll see how Cam Akers, he was going to be the lead back in week 2 before he got hurt, early on in that game. And if he comes back next week or the next week, he might be closer to my lineup than ever before. Like, you kind of have that longer range, like you mentioned, viewpoint of, let's see what happens by week 6 or week 8, and how things go. Not, I need to trade Saquon Barkley for Joe Mixon and James Conner right now, because to me, that's sort of a redraft mentality. That's a what's going to happen in the next 2 months mentality. Whereas if you look over the course of the next 3 years, of all of these data points mattering, then how does that deal look within the lens of my team and my trades, is what I would say is one of my final thoughts.
Yeah. And that mix and trade, like if you take this in a 3-year window, right, you're giving, I don't know, what's Barkley at, maybe a 10th of a win over replacement right now, something like that. All right, you're giving Mixon basically a pretty big lead, and I think Barkley could smash it by the end of next season, right? Like, in terms of warp, like, he could outproduce Mixon in a season what Mixon can do in the next,
Two.
You're right, 23 games or whatever it is, or 22 games, whatever it is in the regular season between this year and next year, right? I think that Barkley could smash him. So, that's, I think, a thing to think about, and, and trying to piece it together. And honestly, like, yeah, some of the backups might be gone, but kick it out, right? Damian Williams was he won people leagues and was an afterthought at this point that year. Tim Hightower, going back, right? Was it 15, 16, something like that, where he won people, right? He was buying Christmas presents for people because of how big his performance in the fantasy playoffs were. And he was an afterthought in September, right? So just because you're stuck right now, right, just optimize, right? Just use now to optimize, right? Think ahead, right? And sometimes it's not, you don't want to be in a situation where, oh, now I got to blow 85% of my waiver wire budget on Mike Davis. You want to be in a situation where I spent, okay, $2 on Mike Davis, and now I'm spending a couple bucks on, whoever the next guy is in whatever situation's opening up.
Yeah, that's a great point because again, it's constantly evolving, and that's the part that I don't think you got to stay up on it every single week because, like for example, Royce Freeman was dropped in leagues. Why? Completely blocked. Now you've got Philip Lindsay with turf toe that we know don't be like within the range of outcomes. This lingers all year, and Philip Lindsay, whether he's in, out, in again, I mean, this could be a thing that persists to the point that really Royce Freeman is the backup you want there for the rest of the year. So what happens in 1 week, 3 weeks, if Melvin Gordon goes down? Royce Freeman is that you rolled the 7 and now you got him, And so the real thing that I think is going to be starting in week 3, I'm looking at some of the players that are already being dropped in some of my leagues, Jordan, and just keep your eyes open because it's going to get even better for those looking at these volcanic upside equations when bye weeks get here because people are going to be needing starters at quarterback, tight end. Not saying you won't, but just if you're trying to optimize and be running back centric, there's going to be some guys dropped, outright dropped. And they're like, oh, yeah, I want to keep them. Well, if you look at their roster, it's like, well, in 2 weeks when you need a quarterback to stream, you're going to also need, maybe you have an elite defense you don't want to drop. You might have to drop 2 or 3 guys and float them for 1 week. And that's going to be the time that you can get in there, bid quasi-aggressively, not 20% of your budget or even 10%. But the point is, more than the $1 minimum that owner thinks they're going to get them back for because they floated them out there. And you can get right in there and start getting the other players from other rosters that they have to float out there as long as you vice grip them and go, hey, maybe that means I drop my 3rd tight end. That's the guy I float for a week. Maybe I drop my 3rd quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, because it's like I got 2 other guys. And yeah, Tannehill's better than said running back, but I got to float him out there. Let's see what happens. If someone else picks up a 3rd quarterback, so be it. I got Russell Wilson and somebody else. You on the grand scheme, you can't care too much, right? I mean, like I was in one league. It's like I put in a bid and it's like to drop Gerald Everett. It's like I like Gerald Everett, but you know what? Let's brass tacks. Let's be realistic here. Like he's a tight end handcuff. so are we? Is this a thing we're doing in one tight end? No, we are not. That's when you have to slap your hand and say, I have to optimize my roster. And sometimes that means you have to. I mean, Jordan, you're in some of these throwback safe leagues, right? Where I inhabited this orphan that had 4 tight ends on it, and it had been hurting my soul. But the 4th guy was good enough that it's like, well, you can't just drop him. I've shopped them every which way but Sunday, and you know what? I dropped them. Yeah. And you know what? It's fine. I forgot I even had them the next week. I had 1 more running back on my roster, and everything was fine. So you just got to get over that and realize if you think they're a roster clogger, let them be a roster clogger for somebody else, for goodness sake. Get over it. And you know what? If you're wrong in 18 months and the player breaks out in November of 2021, okay. But you got a lot of chances to get flip players and starts out of all the players you rostered instead until then. And that's if they were right. And that same team has them, which I would say shame on you. All right.
It sounds like a favorite Football Guys feature, cutting the cord.
Joe Jordan. That honestly, with my negative slant sometimes on players, I love nothing more than to write up 12 to 15 players every week and say, get rid of these guys. And I love how I get to talk about like a top 15 quarterback because I'm talking about redraft. I can go cut that guy. It's like Peyton Manning, cut that meat, right?
Carson Wentz.
I did write down, we're still not sure if he's good.
Yes.
And I just wrote that, and then I just wrote cut him. Cut that guy. So you've been listening to episode 22 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. In this episode, we discussed a whole lot about the macro strategy. And really, you have to get into in-season to know this. With Saquon Barkley, a little bit on Christian McCaffrey, different principles there, the values of building your bench in Dynasty leagues the right way to actually benefit. If you have a high market share of these backup running backs, the week 2 could have been viewed as a good day for your Dynasty portfolio, as opposed to a negative and altering, you want to, cry in the shower sort of way, losing your core guys. So again, if you look at it from the opposite perspective and also realize your league mate that had Barkley or McCaffrey, now you have a better advantage towards them by comparison. So we talked about that. We actually gave some example trades, talked about those backfields in depth, a little bit on the waiver wire strategy for this week. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.